To me, raised in the land of ZZ Top and State Fair corn dogs, a professional classical musician seems to exist, maybe more than any other occupation, in a very insular, elevated, and exclusive culture. These are the cream of conservatory-trained players whose lives have been about intense and almost ritualistic study and practice. They play complex repertoires of great beauty, but mostly to enlightened audiences in great and often centuries-old music halls, cathedrals. Their tuxedo or gown bills must be extraordinarily high. We traveled to the Belogurov Center in Stonington Borough to chat with the superb pianist, vintage instrument expert, Artem Belogurov, and were delighted and slightly embarrassed to learn he's humble, funny, casual. Well, he's basically a normal dude.
My name is Artem Belogurov, and I play historical keyboard instruments, I would say, including piano and all sorts of historical versions, predecessors of piano, different types of instruments, harpsichords, clavichords, sometimes organ, but that's a different beast altogether. So mostly I play keyboard instruments with strings.
Given the way you just described what you do, it makes me wonder if from an early age, A, what made you interested in that sort of thing, and B, does being an expert in a specific sort of historical instrument predetermine, to a certain extent, your repertoire?
Actually, it's the other way around. At least for me, that's how it was. So I started out as a modern pianist, like many other people. Just went to school to study piano. Taught myself how to read music.
Really, you taught yourself?
Yeah. We had a piano at home. I was really fascinated by that thing. And then I wanted to play Beethoven sonatas, which were way beyond what I could manage technically, but I was very determined as a young kid. Then I also got interested in composition, so I actually did mostly composition. Piano was secondary for me for a while. And then when I got to the conservatory in Boston, New England Conservatory, somewhere in the middle, I got interested in historical pianos. There's a collection of instruments outside of Boston and Ashburnham, Massachusetts, called the Fredericks Collection. They have wonderful instruments there. So I went there, and things just made so much more sense to me. I always liked classical repertoire, so Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, that kind of stuff. And when I played that music on those instruments, I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Is it because of a tonal difference, or you feel a connection, or?
Yeah, everything. Definitely the sound is different. So how sound develops, the attack, the clarity, the different sort of registers of the instrument sound different as opposed to a more homogeneous sound in modern piano. But also how instruments feel. So the action, how quickly it reacts. And for that music that is full of small expressive gestures rather than sort of longer, broader strokes, lines of romantic repertoire. It makes it speaks a lot better, and that's very important for that music.
So let's back up a little bit. You said something that it was a sentence or a couple of sentences that I don't think I heard a whole lot of when I was growing up, which was that you taught yourself to read music because you wanted to play Beethoven sonatas. And I'm laughing not because that's it's far from a stupid thing to do. It's just not anything that I associate with childhood.
Right.
So you grew up in Europe.
Yeah. So I was born in Latvia, in Riga, and then when I was 4, my family moved to Ukraine, to Odessa. So I basically grew up in Odessa.
And what was it about your childhood were you surrounded by friends? Yeah, I know you said you had a piano in the house, but where people your age might have been listening to Nirvana, if you grew up, you were born in the 80s.
Right, yeah, I discovered Nirvana much too late, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have been in a rock band.
But so how did this classical music stuff occur to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There wasn't really anything special about my family. Nobody in my family was a musician. We had some LPs, some vinyls with classical stuff, like every good Soviet family. You know, have a little bit of culture, just in right doses. But you're right that there was somebody, there was a neighbor who was my age, who was playing accordion and piano as well. So there was that, and I guess I wanted to do something like this. And there was a piano in the house. So I don't really remember exactly how I got into it.
Yeah. So if that was your interest and clearly it blossomed and it stayed a consistent thing you wanted to do, was it something that set you apart from your schoolmates? Or like over here, and as you and I were talking before we started taping, I grew up in Texas, and I don't remember any kid in my school. There were certainly music classes, and people joined band and stuff. But I think if I'd said, you know what, I'm in the fourth grade, and rather than play football, I'm going to be Paganini or whatever, I probably would have been, if not ridiculed, then pummeled. Which says more about Texas than the human condition, I think. But so what was it like? Was you just like, oh, there's Artem, he plays classical piano or whatever?
Right, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I guess most kids were not that much into classical music, but there were a lot of music schools, so it was not unusual for kids to go to a music school, try things out, and then of course most would prefer sports or whatever, other things. So at some point, I think when I was 12, I went to sort of a special music school, so everybody there was a musician, so I wasn't anymore surrounded by people who were not musicians.
Did you have to audition for that?
Yes, actually, I did. And it was kind of hard to get into, and I think I barely made it, also because I started quite late, so sort of in the regular school, academic subjects, I was in 5th grade or something like this, but I only played piano for 3 or 4 years, so I had to skip a year or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was some sort of adjustments that needed to be made. Yeah, so from that point on, I was surrounded by other musicians. At least at that point, they were studying music. Most of those kids actually didn't end up being musicians professionally. I think from my class, I think I'm the only one who's still doing music, actually.
That's, again, you weren't pushed in any way to do it, not even like, take some lessons, it'll be good for discipline. So that doesn't surprise me, because it was something you developed on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I did other things as well. I played tennis, I did karate, I was okay at both. But yeah, music somehow, I never questioned it.
So that leads me down a path that I hadn't anticipated. So if your string quartet was sharing a bill with another classical act ensemble,
yeah,
and there was an argument that broke out, you could sort of beat them up with martial arts.
Not anymore.
Well, I just thought, why not, you know?
Yeah, no, it's a good skill to have in rehearsals for sure, yeah.
Okay. I am a big fan of progressive rock, and I remember growing up and in real time with bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or Yes,
Right.
or King
Yeah.
Crimson, that sort of thing, Kansas. And it was always fascinating to me that there were very few progressive rock bands, successful anyway, from the United States. They were all mostly from Britain or Europe. And someone explained to me, and I assume that, well, I'm asking you, that children over there are much more inundated with classical music than maybe we would be over here, and that would make there a sort of a formative difference in if you were going to pursue more complex, quote-unquote, rock music. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, although I wonder if it has more to do with... Because I imagine if you grow up in Boston or New York, you also have a lot of classical music around you. Yeah. And I don't know how it is in Britain if you're not in one of the big cities. But yeah, definitely for something like prog rock, classical music is an important influence. But also, I think earlier in jazz, think about Bill Evans or somebody like that, right? He was trained as a classical musician.
Right.
I recently saw his program from his senior recital, which was, Debussy, Shostakovich, these kinds of, very sort of standard classical repertoire. It would have been amazing to be there to hear, young Bill Evans playing classical music.
When I was in college, Dave Brubeck had a band with his sons called Two Generations of Brubeck, and they came to the college that I was at and played a concert, and they took a break, and somehow the three sons got locked into their dressing room, and they couldn't get them out. The break kept going on, and everybody's like, what's going on, And so finally, Dave, the elder, comes out, and he says, my sons are locked in their dressing room, and we're trying to find a custodian to let them out. And somebody hollered out, play something. And he said, that's a good idea. And he sat down, and instead of playing jazz, he started playing classical music. And
wow.
And Artem, it was maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then the kids come bounding out onto the stage. But it was not something I expected, and it made me. It's sort of what you're talking about with the Bill Evans thing. I think at a certain level, you guys can leap in from one thing to another, right?
Yeah, in a way, it's all music, right? Sort of the basic ingredients are the same, and also specifically with the kind of approach to music that I have, which is what we call historically informed performance practice. Sounds very academic, and there is the academic aspect to it too, for sure. But there is also the idea that, a lot of classical music was improvised traditionally. So during the 18th century, all of these famous composers and performers like Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt were great improvisers. And in addition to that, also the way audiences interacted with performers was actually much closer to what it's like in a jazz concert.
No kidding.
Yeah, so when Mozart was playing his concerto and improvising a cadenza, and something particularly impressive would happen, people would cheer him on and clap and in a concert, and in a classical music concert.
That's interesting.
Which is not imaginable anymore.
No, and there are obviously no live recordings and no notation of those improvisatory, is that the right word, passages.
Well, there are actually. There are no recordings. You're right about that. I mean, no recordings of Mozart, although the history of recording goes quite far back. But there are some improvisations that were written down, either by Mozart for other performers, for his students, or for his sister, who were not as good at improvisation, or at least he didn't think they were as good, or they didn't think they were as good, so they wanted him to write things down. Or, there are other sources where people would actually write these improvisations down, and those are very valuable to us now when we try to recreate that kind of style of playing. So I do quite a bit of improvisation in my performances.
Okay. So I saw you perform here in the LaGrua Center a few months ago.
Yeah.
And I cannot remember what Haydn was probably on. Beethoven was on that program.
No, actually, that was all earlier stuff.
Was it?
So early 18th
I can't
century,
remember.
So before
All right.
Beethoven, Haydn were even born.
Would you have improvised during that show?
Yes, there were some sections or some elements that were improvised, ornamentation, things like that. It's a little bit like, if we're talking about rock music, somebody was doing a cover and, doing their own solo.
Yeah.
Changing things, playing with things. Like Jimi Hendrix doing Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah, right.
It has very little to do with the original, even though, it came out, what was it, the day before?
Yes,
You're before.
Exactly right. He played it the
London,
day
right?
after the album was released. And
he was trying to get Eric Clapton to tune his guitar, right? It didn't quite work out.
Exactly. Wow. So when you are improvising, as you were that day, it must be obviously something that you enjoy doing. Is it annoying that idiots like me are sitting out there and aren't aware that you were improvisational at that point?
Oh, I don't even think about that. That doesn't really matter to me.
Okay, good. I'd hate for you to go.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want people to know exactly what I'm doing at any given point. I don't think it's that important, actually.
All right.
I don't want people to be sitting there and following with the score and thinking, oh, now he's improvising, or this is not exactly what's written.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's beyond the point.
My blissful idiocy was okay then.
You're being too harsh on yourself.
Well, but all right.
I mean, if it resonated with you in some way, what I was doing, that's it.
Well,
that's what we're going for.
Yeah,
In this sense, it's no different from prog rock.
Fair enough. So you have a career where, again, growing up in Texas, it was the only thing that was classical that was a big deal to me, or that I remember, was that Van Cliburn was from Fort Worth, which was the next town over.
Right, of course, yeah.
And it was Tchaikovsky. So I assume that was his chosen repertoire. For whatever reason, it resonated with him, and he became known, I guess that's fair to say, for his performances of Tchaikovsky. So your fascination, and we kind of went over this a little earlier, but you are now known, and I assume sought after for festivals or performances or clinics or whatever, because you have an expertise in the historical instruments and the music that would be associated with that era. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
So give me an example of a few of the composers that you particularly relish that might show up on your programs at any given moment.
I would say that there are maybe 3 different periods where I would have my favorites, and they also have to do with sort of slightly different sets of instruments. So with the earliest stuff I play, well, the earliest music I play is Baroque, and mostly late Baroque. And a lot of what I do there is actually chamber music. So with my ensemble Postscript, for example, we sometimes we work with singers, or it's just instrumental music, but with several players, and I play continuo, which is actually, all of that is improvisation, because I just have a bass line, sometimes with some numbers, again, very similar to jazz, like chords, and then exactly what I do there is up to the player with some knowledge of the style and all of that, but there's a lot of improvisation involved there. And with that, I really like German High Baroque. I would say composers like Telemann, Bach, Handel, So that's some of my favorite stuff there. And then going later where pianos came in. So all of this earlier stuff is mostly harpsichord music.
Right.
And with pianos, what the program that you heard, actually a lot of that I played for the first time because I don't usually play that early repertoire on such early pianos. As we talked before, this is quite rare that you get an opportunity to play on the copies of the earliest pianos ever made. But then, I really like classical repertoire. So Mozart, I would say, is probably, of all of the composers, maybe is my favorite. So that's sort of second category of instruments and repertoire. And then I'm also interested in romantic repertoire. So that's instrument-wise, it's much closer to modern piano, bigger instruments with, bigger, fatter sound. And there it would probably be Chopin. I would single him out as.
Okay. When you're on tour and you're going from town to town, is it you might be solo one night, might be a quartet one night, or is it you go, this is all solo, this junket or whatever?
Ideally I try to combine appearances. So it's the same program that's repeated several times. So if it's solo, then it's going to be a bunch of solo concerts in a row. But it doesn't always work out like that. So sometimes it's a bunch of different things all kind of bunched up randomly together, which makes it logistically complicated often, but also fun and challenging.
Do you have, we've been back and forth talking about rock music a little bit, and so it makes me wonder, I mean, you've won international competitions. You are an established, very big deal. That's my inference, and I do my homework. So if you were, for example, for the purpose of the audience in this area, I will point out that I picked up Artem where he's staying near Watch Hill, and just to pass the time while we were driving over here to the La Grua Center, we discussed the fact that Taylor Swift had one of her homes is in Watch Hill. So I'm not going to go so far as to say you were the Taylor Swift of historical classical keyboards, but the point is, do you get to say, I'm coming to your town and I'm going to be in your venue, here's what's on my hospitality rider, and when you get to the venue, then there's like a deli tray or a case of exotic beer or whatever? Do you have that sort of stuff?
Not really, no.
Huh?
Not really.
Not really?
No, we don't.
Do you think you're missing an opportunity?
I mean, I never thought of that, actually.
This is why I should be your road manager.
I think so. I think you're hired now.
I mean, here you are drinking a can of soft drink that is in the venue, so you did avail yourself of their hospitality. But
right. Well, I know that they don't mind if I steal a drink once in a while.
Yeah.
So I had a previous agreement with these guys here. I don't do it everywhere, you know.
Okay.
I don't just
all right. And you know,
grabbing things.
we both know them very well. They're very Dan and Kelly are wonderful people here,
they are.
and Christopher. But okay, so here's one thing I would do if I was you.
Okay.
And you'll tell me why this is stupid, okay?
I'm
If
sure
I
it's
was
not gonna be
you,
stupid.
huh?
I'm sure it's not going to be stupid.
Oh,
I should be taking notes.
No, this is ridiculous. But it's the sort of thing I would do.
Okay.
You are walking out of the presumably very nice hotel that these people put you up in, and wait, there's a hotel in the lobby. Do you just wander over knowing in your mind, I'm about to blow some people's minds and just sit down and go nuts for the people in the lobby. Have you ever done that?
No, I've never done that. But also...
Why?
So you meant to say that there's a piano in the lobby or something?
Yeah.
Like that, right?
What
Okay.
did I say?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did I say?
You said there's a hotel in the lobby.
Oh.
Which is...
There's a lobby hotel and a piano in the lobby of the hotel. And
Right.
So I apologize for the confusion, but you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't think I ever stayed in a hotel where there was a piano in the lobby. They don't...
Or it could be like a nightclub or a restaurant or something where they have a fine restaurant where maybe
Right,
later...
well, I mean, I don't think managers would appreciate that some random person is starting to...
Well, not if I got up there and butchered chopsticks, but you're going to sit down there and nuance something that's immortal.
Yeah, I think I would still get told off for this.
Huh. Well, then I'm not going in any of those restaurants again.
At least that would be my assumption. I don't know. I would, I wouldn't feel like this was my place.
All right. Now, this is the little section, in case you haven't already figured it out now, where I'm going to ask you some goofy questions.
Oh, yeah, I love those, yes.
Okay, well, how come I can go onto your website, but I can't go to a store and get a T-shirt?
A T-shirt, yeah. That's a really good idea. With my ensemble, with Postscript, we were talking about coming up with some merch.
I think you should have merch.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
No, I did buy a CD.
We don't do this in classical
when you were
music, yeah, but we do CDs, and actually we have a vinyl coming in, which is also quite rare.
Yeah.
Well, so that's fun. And I think the first thing we'll do, actually, that was my girlfriend's idea, which I think is very clever, is to have most of the time we sell, our CDs or whatever at concerts. That's pretty much the only way people still buy physical recordings in physical format. So she was thinking, if we're going to sell vinyl, especially if it's in the Netherlands and it rains quite often,
Yeah.
and people are not going to come with bags that will fit, vinyl. So we should have some sort of a tote, nice tote bags, not nice Postscript tote bags that would come together with a vinyl. It makes it much more appealing to.
I think it's a great idea.
To get both. So I mean, we'll start with exactly. We'll start with those, and
Postscript
mugs.
has a nice logo. There's one on your website that looks like a logo.
Yeah, right. Yeah. PS,
Now,
yeah.
I want people to spend time on your personal website as well as for the ensemble Postscript. But I want you to go on the Postscript website and check out the pants that Artem's wearing. They're so bright yellow. It's like I have to put sunglasses on to look at them.
I know which one's talking.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So there was a specific reason for that, actually.
Man, those are some happening pants.
Yeah, I know. So this is from a particular program, and you should see what everybody else is wearing.
Well, I did. You're just telling the
he's
listeners to look at everybody else.
Right, yeah. He's wearing this super bright red sweater. So that program it's called Four Temperaments, and in Baroque times, they had these very specific ideas of what kind of emotions music communicates, and also what kind of people. So depending on whether you're melancholic or choleric or whatever, the four different, as they call them, temperaments, that people would be more predisposed to reacting to certain emotions, or certain moods stronger. So we made this program where each one of us, we actually found online one of those tests that, they ask you a bunch of questions, and then they'll tell you what kind of personality traits you have. So I ended up being choleric, and yellow is the color that's traditionally associated with that character. And so the whole program was structured around four temperaments, and there are four of us. So each one of us would be playing music and tonalities, and sort of in character that goes well with our assigned roles.
That's a great idea.
So it was music, and we decided to include color in that as well, because it was during COVID, and it was a video recorded
Yeah.
by this festival. So it was a kind of a live concert that was then shown online to
Those
audiences.
pants, man, they're going on. I
Yeah,
liked it.
I still have them.
Well, try to remember to pack those the next time you come this way.
Sure.
Now, when I think of classical musicians or the shows that I have seen, the performances I have seen, invariably in world-class concert halls or cathedrals, places that have acoustics designed for this, the great sight lines, et cetera, et cetera. You ever play any place ugly?
In terms of sound or or
Just
visually?
like you walked in and go, what is this pit? You know,
Yes.
you have?
Yes, I have.
That doesn't seem fair. It seems that
Well,
if you elevate
Don't always
yourself-
get everything right.
Well, I just think that if you are going to invest the time to become as eloquent on your instrument as you have,
That's a really good word.
I think of it as an eloquence.
Yeah, no, that's a very appropriate adjective for
Well, good.
the music of this time and for these instruments. Yeah,
I think virtuosity is overused, personally.
I mean, I would say it's one aspect.
Yeah, but I just feel like anybody that, you just hear the word virtuosic a lot.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway,
It's kind of a basic. I mean, you have to be, if you're going to be a soloist or
yes.
yeah, you have to be
Right.
virtuosic. It has to be one of the
Right. So I get to a point where we were about to go into something interesting there in terms of aesthetics and how to describe them.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm going to go right back where I was. It was like,
It's going to be
That
something about
eloquent.
pants again.
then you shouldn't have to go play ugly places. You know, that's my
Well, you
thought.
know what's even worse? If the sound is ugly. And that, unfortunately, happens, yeah, even more often than when places are visually ugly. And sometimes it's even the famous concert halls don't have the best acoustic.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
just because
does
of
happen.
age or
No, it's not necessarily age. It's just, I guess, bad planning.
yeah.
You know, I guess there's so much that goes into building a concert hall, and unfortunately, acoustics are not always the priority.
This will be my last question, and I hope I convey it eloquently.
At least do it virtuosically.
I wonder if who of the great composers would you like to see play piano for the sake of it, not because of what they wrote, because a particular piece that you're fond of might not necessarily just be some show-off thing. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Can you infer style from their work? Like, who do you think would be fun to sit around and watch play piano? Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, it does. It's hard to. I guess again, I would go back to either Mozart or Chopin,
Yeah.
and it would be difficult to choose between the two. But those two would be, for me at least, the most interesting ones to observe. I mean, I would be happy with a recording. Even
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
if there, suddenly a recording popped up.
Wow.
There was some early sound recording experiments. They could record, but they couldn't reproduce those recordings already in 1840s, if not earlier,
Right.
in France. And now with modern technology, we can actually reproduce these things.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. But there's nothing instrumental. It's just people singing and
Right.
talking.
Do you think? And this is sort of where I was going with this. Is elemental and 3-chord primal rock as Jerry Lee Lewis was, for example. You know Jerry Lee Lewis?
Yeah.
I saw him once when he was older, and he was just sort of mailing it in. But then in the last 5 minutes, I guess maybe he could smell the whiskey backstage, or he knew he was getting ready to get. But he went nuts, and he was fantastic. But a lot of it was the visual flair. Mm-hmm. And can you? When I think of Mozart or Chopin or whatever, I just envision these guys sitting there calmly being brilliant. But is there anything about what you've read about them or their personalities that lead you to believe, well, this guy might have been more flamboyant as a performer than this one or whatever? Visual personality, do you envision that? Anything historical that leads you to infer something like that?
Yeah, there are definitely, you can definitely get a sense from descriptions of the time, you get a sense of how people looked when they played. And for example, Philipp Emanuel Bach, the son of Johann Sebastian Bach, who was actually much more famous than his father at the time.
Yeah.
He was known for having extreme emotions depicted on his face as he was playing. You could see everything that was sort of going through his whole body in a way. But at the same time, the types of instruments that they played on back then just require a much more still and quiet technique. So you can't really move your hands around, your arms around as much as modern pianists can allow themselves to do today. So that kind of visual presentation of playing a keyboard instrument came in later. Okay,
I got you.
Yeah.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do it. Is there something you would like to say about what you do, or?
No, I think we covered all the main points, the yellow pants, merch. I can't think of anything else.
Job Description is a production of the Day Publishing Company in New London, Connecticut, and is hosted by me, Rick Coster. Peter Wappy produces and edits the show. Our theme song is Here and Now by the band Wind Up, written by Michael Clay and Ernie Myers. Can't get enough of me? I write a free weekly newsletter called The Fun Never Stops. You can subscribe at theday.com/newsletters. If you want to support this podcast, leave a rating or a review wherever you listen to, or even better, subscribe to The Day at theday.com/subscribe.